Hey everyone, welcome to my channel, Raven, who is also Brooke, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about the Netflix documentary, The Reckoning, about P. Diddy. Now, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and to follow me on all my social media platforms, and remember that this is my opinion.
That's my opinion!
And I want to give a disclaimer before we get into everything that this video does talk about mature themes, including violence against women, and use. So let's just get right into the video. So this documentary was it was like, as each episode was just going by, it felt very draining to watch, because it just felt like a new fact that we learned about Diddy just really sucked the energy out of me. It was just a very exhausting documentary just because of how much it highlighted how Diddy really is a terror to society. Like, this man truly is a terror to society. I even tweeted, like, if evil was a person, like, Diddy is like one of those people who unfortunately are part of the human race who genuinely is like the definition of evil. Like, if it's a person, Diddy is one of those people that we're gonna put as the definition of evil. And it was gosh. So for this video, I'm going to go through every episode. I'm going to be talking about the highlights from every episode, and then at the end, I'm going to give my overall thoughts. So sit back, relax, and let's get into how Diddy was a true terror to society. So episode 1 mainly focused on Diddy's childhood, who he was when he got into his young adulthood, and his time when he went to Uptown Records. So when you first watch the documentary, it's showing footage of Diddy in the midst of him about to be arrested for these federal charges. And the first thing I put in my notes literally was, why the did he record himself? That's literally the first thing that I thought of. Like, now when it comes to the footage that's being showed in this documentary where someone is following Diddy around before his arrest, Netflix did obtain this footage legally. It is being reported that Diddy never paid for the footage, therefore it belonged to the videographers, and those videographers then sold that footage to Netflix, and their identity has remained confidential. Also, I wanted to highlight that this documentary was directed by Alexandria Stapleton, a woman of color who is also an Emmy award-winning director, and I feel like she did a very good job with this documentary. Everything felt very well balanced. All topics that were touched went into detail, and I just feel like she did a really good job. So I wanted to give more spotlight to her. Why would you record yourself? And then the more I thought about it, it's like, this man thought that he was about to get off and he was about to do a documentary about this whole thing, and then try to spin it into like, oh, they were trying to tear the black man down. This is all a plot. This is all a conspiracy. Because when you go into the later episodes and they show more footage and just the comments that him and his son Justin Combs makes, I feel like that theory plays more into everything, that I really think that he thought that he was about to get away with every charge, and that he was going to have this documentary and this redemption arc and just show everyone like he really was the good person. Like, people just wanted to tear the good black man down, the black man who, you know, forcefully made himself the poster child for black excellence. So we find out that when Diddy was a child, his dad was actually a well-known dealer in Harlem, where Diddy is from, and then his dad ended up dying because he was murdered. Diddy was just a child. So pretty much throughout Diddy's whole life, it's been him and his mom. And according to a lot of people that knew him as a child, his mom, Janice Combs, pretty much had to be the mom and the dad. And I put in my notes that I feel like this is probably where a lot of toxic masculinity traits came from. And then I feel like my point was kind of, you know, given a little bit more ammunition when one of his childhood friends who lived with Diddy and his mom, because like him and his family rented like the first floor of like Diddy's home, and he said that Janice was very hard on Diddy. She would often him. They show a clip of Diddy talking about how his mom told him, you know, if someone hits you, you gotta hit them 10 times harder. And then this childhood friend also alleged that Janice used to throw parties, and just the way that he talked about it, it kind of seemed like these parties were very inappropriate for children. And if these things are true, that really does give a lot of context into who Diddy is. So Diddy did go to Howard University, but then he dropped out and then he went to New York. And while in New York, that is when he met Andre Harrell, who founded Uptown Records, where Diddy ended up becoming an intern. And that was his foot into the door into music. And then in my notes, I literally put how Andre Harrell is like the reason why we are stuck with Diddy, why society had to learn about Diddy. And I'll get into this more when we talk about episode 2 of how I feel like Andre Harrell, as far as the practices that Diddy did as a music executive, he definitely got them from Andre Harrell, and I don't mean that in a good way. So after we learn more about his childhood in the documentary, we of course go into more of how Diddy was starting out at Uptown Records, and they talk about a basketball charity event that happened in 1991. And at this charity event, unfortunately, 9 people ended up passing away because there was a stampede that essentially happened because security was not the best and pretty much was non-existent at this event. So people that didn't even have tickets just began to come in, and they were all rushing like a stairwell, and people just ended up getting trampled, and unfortunately they passed away. And in the documentary, they say that this moment is when Diddy unfortunately got his notoriety, and you will see that this becomes a pattern almost to an extent, in the sense that tragedies have to happen for Diddy to enter more and more into fame, especially because at that time, like, Diddy was looked at as the event host, so he was the one going, you know, all into the media, basically explaining the situation, sending out condolences to families and all that. And also, we learn of a woman named Joy Dickerson Neal, and she is a woman that is currently filing a lawsuit against Diddy for that happened in 1991. And she talks about how the reason that she ended up around Diddy in the first place, because she was actually in a music video that was for Uptown Records, and she was like Diddy's love interest. And she alleged that when the happened, that Diddy actually recorded it and sent it to people, and then her parents found out about the assault, and she even showed the letter that her parents had sent to Diddy and his family, basically explaining how this situation has really pretty much destroyed Joy, how this has been very emotionally and mentally traumatic for her to go through. And then Joy said that she did end up seeing Diddy about a year after, and Diddy just outright said, "I did not do this, I didn't show a recording," and etc, etc, basically just denying that he did anything. And also, she wrote down this incident in her journal, which they also showed in the documentary. And something interesting that was said in the documentary when it pertained to Diddy recording himself having sex with people, and they compared it to how very notorious Harlem drug dealer Alpo Martinez, I guess, of how, you know, it was very well known that he would record himself having sex with women. And a lot of people said that maybe Diddy did this to kind of exert power in the way that Alpo had. And I just found that very interesting because, again, when you go through Diddy's life, especially when he became more and more famous, he really was trying to assert his dominance in a way, almost like someone who was a quote unquote loser in their life, and then they get money and power, and they just slowly start to become the person that they always wanted to be, which is usually a person who, again, is a terror to society. And going back to Andre Harrell, they then began to talk about just how he was in Uptown Records in terms of being an intern and having more of a role when it came to music. Again, earlier when I talked about how I feel like Andre Harrell told Diddy some very shady, almost predatory practices in the music industry, he allegedly told him that as the basically music executive, you are more important than the artist. And that shows, again, when you go into Diddy's career and how he was when he was the owner of Bad Boy. So everything really comes together. And I will say, this is probably the only positive thing I will say about Diddy. As a music executive, as an intern, he did have an ear for music. Now, when I say that, I'm not saying that he was talented in a sense as a producer, because he wasn't. And people in the documentary literally talk about how as a producer, like, he was not talented at all. But when he heard a hit, he knew it was a hit. And in this documentary, they credited him for really helping usher in the genre of hip hop soul, especially with Mary J. Blige and Jodeci. They talked about how with Jodeci, he pretty much helped change their whole image with them wearing the baggy clothes, the hats to the back and stuff like that. And then even when it comes to Mary J. Blige, he really helped usher in this new genre and made Mary J. Blige the face of that. And also, we begin to get into the very reoccurring pattern that Diddy had of taking women from people that are supposed to be his quote unquote friends. For example, rapper Eric Sermon was actually dating Misa Hilton before Diddy was, and Misa Hilton is the father to Diddy's first biological son, Justin. And Eric talked about how Diddy basically took her from him. And also, Eric worked with Diddy. And in the documentary, they first talk about the first instance where people have seen with their own eyes how he can be abusive. And according to Kirk Burrows, who is also the co-founder of Bad Boy, he watched Diddy allegedly Misa in the street, and he said that when he saw that, he kind of put it back into his mind and said, oh, this is just a bad moment. And then as Diddy's rise began, especially after he pretty much was looked at as the person who helped push Mary J. Blige and Jodeci into the mainstream, he became in the industry known as the go-to guy, the guy that can break artists. Anytime any fans saw Diddy, they would always try to give him a CD or rap for him or sing for him, because he was seen as the gatekeeper when it came to at least black music and getting into hip-hop and R&B. Now, going back to the charity basketball event where 9 people unfortunately passed away, something the documentary talks about, which is actually very fucked up. And again, we start to see a pattern of how when it comes to money and business decisions, Diddy can be very shady and very selfish. And when Diddy was starting Bad Boy, and the reason that Diddy even started Bad Boy is because, again, Andre Harrell ended up firing him because he felt like Diddy was kind of starting to, get a big head in a sense. And at this time, Diddy already had discovered Biggie. So when he did leave Uptown Records, Andre Harrell let him take Biggie with him to start Bad Boy. But when Diddy did start Bad Boy, he put 75% ownership into his mom's name and 25% ownership into Kirk Burrows' name. And the reason that he did that is because allegedly he didn't want to have to pay the victims of the charity basketball events. That's just evil. Just evil. And many people say that once he got Bad Boy, once he kind of skated around having to pay for the basketball charity event, that's kind of when he became the evil person that we know today. Allegedly, when him and his mom were talking about the charity basketball event, Diddy called her a bitch and her and told her to essentially mind her business. So yeah. And this is when we now get into Bad Boy in that whole era. Now, when they first talk about Bad Boy, of course, they talk about the starts of it and how Biggie was essentially the star. And they also had Craig Mack, who had the hit Flavor in Your Ear. And something interesting that they talk about is how when Biggie first dropped Juicy, that was not the song that popped off at all. It actually started off very slow and it didn't crack even the top 10, which is crazy. Like 12 is a good number, but it didn't crack the top 10, so they didn't see it as him really, hitting the groundwork and becoming the rap star that he did become. And according to Kirk Burrows, who again was the co-founder of Bad Boy, they began to look at Tupac, especially for the song I Get Around and that video. And I Get Around is basically about, a guy having a lot of women. So that is when they decided to drop Big Papa, and that is the single that really pushed Biggie into mainstream success. And it's so interesting because they talk about how Diddy was also himself almost trying to emulate who Tupac was, emulate his whole aura. He began to dress very differently, especially with all the silk. He began to present himself as a very luxurious, rich person, the same energy that Tupac was giving, especially in that I Get Around video, essentially a ladies' man. And that is a rumor that a lot of people who have worked close with Diddy and have done interviews over the years have said that Diddy was basically jealous of Tupac and wanted to be Tupac and have the aura that he had. And toward the end of episode 1, they just really talk about how Biggie and Tupac were actually very close friends. Tupac saw a lot in Biggie. He would, take him on tour with him and let him do some shows with him, give him a platform. And Diddy was jealous of that because Diddy saw an artist as someone someone who is in debt to him. Like, I should be your best friend. You owe life to me. I'm giving you all this fame and notoriety. Like, I should be the only person that you were close to. And then that is when we get into episode 2. So in episode 2, we also have Tupac's cousin, William Lassane, who is also being interviewed. And allegedly, Diddy wanted to work with Tupac, but Tupac saw Diddy as a shady person and didn't want to do business with him. And in my head, I think this is when Tupac had a target on his back from Diddy, and he was seen as someone that he really needs to take down. So then this is when they get into when that infamous situation happened where Tupac was at the same studio where Biggie and Diddy were. And a lot of people say that Diddy is the one who set up Tupac. And this situation is the thing that caused the rift between Tupac and Biggie. And not even the whole East Coast and West Coast situation yet. This was just strictly causing a rift between Tupac and Biggie. And, you know, Diddy was going around in interviews saying, you know, none of us at Bad Boy would ever try to set up Tupac to be. Biggie was going around saying that it's a crazy thought to think that anyone from Bad Boy would have Tupac. And at this time, Tupac did end up going to jail briefly after for charges. And while he was still in jail, he was still going after Diddy and Biggie, saying that they were the ones that were setting him up. And then when he got out of jail, he was even more vocal about the fact that he feels like he was being set up by Diddy and Biggie. And they go into how people in the industry were beginning to pick up on how Diddy is just like a devious ass person, but people didn't care because people saw him as the gatekeeper of R&B and hip hop for the black community. He was the one that was bringing in hella money for a lot of people, especially even Clive Davis, because Bad Boy was under Arista Records. And then Kirk Burrows tells a story of how Diddy stood over him with a baseball bat, forcing him to sign over his 25% that was claimed to be his. And Diddy said that he was going to pay him back, but he never did. And then actually in 2003, Kirk Burrows sued Diddy for all the money that he ended up never getting while he was working at Bad Boy, but it was unfortunately dismissed because there is dispute about who the real founder of Bad Boy Records was. Now, when we get into this part, which goes into again how Diddy was always just a shady ass person as a music executive. Before all these heinous things came out about Diddy, before the Cassie lawsuit, I was already watching videos on YouTube. Especially, I remember the first video I saw was by Black Femininity TV. I really love her channel. Y'all should go check it out. And she talked about how Diddy was just to a lot of artists on Bad Boy, how a lot of artists always had a problem getting their money. And in this documentary, they touch on that even more. So apparently artists on Bad Boy would only see their money in their advance, but after they sign that contract and get their advance, they don't see any money after that, because Diddy would insert himself into everything that they were doing, including videos and as a producer. So basically he would insert himself into a video, so he is using your money to pay himself for being in that video as a producer. And again, many people in this documentary were saying how Diddy is not a musically inclined person, and producing work so like scarcely, where like you can just hit this one note on a piano. If that one note in the piano is used, you are looked at as a producer. Or you can even be someone that says, oh, let's use this certain type of sample, and that sample is used, and you are seen as a producer. And people were just saying again how Diddy seemed like more he wanted to be an artist. He wanted to be the one out in the forefront. And again, it makes so much sense because he was all up in everyone's video. Like, and then you will always hear him on the songs with like this dumbass ad lib, especially I think of the song Hypnotize, and you just hear him in the background doing these dumbass ad libs, which again, he used this artist's money to pay himself. So now we get into of how the whole East versus West Coast rivalry started. Now, at this time, we are introduced to Suge Knight. And I just want to preface this before we get into this. I have seen some, not all, but I've seen some people online try to basically insinuate that Suge Knight was a better person than Diddy. And Suge Knight was absolutely not a better person than Diddy. Like, I need us to, you know, why can't two things be true at once? Why does there have to be a hero and a villain? Why can't there just be two villains? I just feel like we all need to, you know, understand that and remember that. And if you want to learn more about Suge Knight, there is a very good documentary about him that he is in on Showtime, where he talks about his life, his time at death row, all the charges that he has been faced against, why he has ended up where he is now. They're both equally ass people. Thank you. But basically, at this time, Tupac had signed to Death Row Records when he was released from jail. And Diddy was trying to keep face in the media that there wasn't any beef happening. But then the Source Awards happened. And at the Source Awards is when we get that infamous speech from Suge Knight where he is saying,
out there want to be an artist and want to stay a star and don't want to have to worry about the executive producer trying to be all in the videos, all on the record, dancing. Come to Death Row.
And there were Death Row artists who also performed at the Source Awards, which was in New York in that year. Snoop Dogg also performed. Dr. Dre gave a speech. It was, it was tensions in the air. Tensions backstage. And then that is when Diddy got on stage after Suge Knight said what he said. And he's like, contrary to what Suge Knight has said, I want us all to succeed. As Black music executives, we all need to make sure that we just stand in solidarity. But people say behind the scenes that Diddy was pissed that Suge Knight made this speech. And honestly, Suge Knight was right. Like, if you are a music executive, why do you need to be in the forefront? Why are you doing ad-libs on my songs? Why are you in my videos dancing? Why are we here? And then this is when they get into the incident that is said to be the real catalyst to the East versus West Coast rap beef. And this was in Atlanta at a club where Diddy was, where Suge Knight was, and a friend of Suge Knight named Jake Robles was actually at this club. And they talked about how basically what happened was everyone was standing outside and then a gunman just came out of nowhere, pointed at Jake and just him. And then Suge Knight allegedly talked about how he put Diddy in a chokehold and put him in front of him. So he's like, if I'm about to get Diddy about to get with me. And a lot of people have speculated that this is something that Diddy set up because that club in that area, I guess, he was very well known and that was kind of like his territory in a sense. So that is what's said to have really started the East versus West Coast rap beef. And now we get into Tupac's. So, for more context, when Diddy and Biggie or just any bad boy artist would go to California, they would mainly have protection from the Mansfield Crips in California. And they actually had a former member in the documentary who said that, yeah, when they would come, they're basically like their security when they would go around California. And Eric Von Zip is mentioned in this documentary. He was a very well-known Crip in California and in New York. And also I want to say that Suge was also a Blood. So, of course, there is heavy gang rivalry right there. And they did, kind of speculate that Eric Von Zip and Diddy had a close relationship because of his dad. Because apparently Diddy has known Eric Von Zip for a very long time. So there's more context to that. So now we get into Tupac's. So this is how the documentary paints out how everything played out and why everything played out the way that it did. So Suge Knight was robbed while he was at a mall and this person was trying to get his death row chain off. And it is alleged that Diddy is the one that ordered that hit because in the police report that they showed, they said that the person was offered $50,000 to get that death row chain off Suge Knight, and it says that it was ordered from someone from Bad Boy and that person is speculated to be Diddy. And apparently Orlando Anderson is the one who robbed Suge Knight. So the night that Tupac was he was at a boxing event where Mike Tyson was fighting. And at this event, there's footage of him going up to someone and basically beating him up. And we find out that this person was Orlando Anderson. Now, in the documentary, they say that the reason that Tupac even went and attacked him is because someone that was in Suge Knight's entourage, tapped Tupac and was said, this is the guy that, was trying to rob Suge Knight at the mall to get the chain. And then that is when Tupac went to him and started beating him up. And then him and Suge Knight ended up leaving the club. And it's so crazy because one time me and my dad were just talking about, kind of the conspiracies around Tupac's. Oh, and that was around the time where Keefe D was arrested for Tupac's. And my dad was literally saying that around that time that Tupac was, there was a lot of speculation of how Orlando Anderson was the one who killed him, and everyone knew that they were the ones that got into that fight, but there just wasn't a lot of context as to why did the fight even start, how did we get to where we got to. So then we get into in the documentary of how Keefe D and Orlando Anderson were related to each other because Orlando was Keefe D's nephew. And in the documentary they say that Keefe D had been close to Diddy since 1994, and mind you, Tupac was killed in 1996. And then they brought up how Keefe D had let Diddy use a car that was ended up used in like an Usher video from when Usher first came out, and you can see Diddy driving the car and Usher on top of the car. So they had some type of rapport for a good minute up until Tupac. So they bring in a detective who had been investigating Tupac and Biggie Smalls, and they play an interview that happened in 2008 where Keefe D is basically spilling his guts out. And then this is when we get into Hit 'Em Up. Now, everyone knows the infamous diss song Hit 'Em Up that Tupac did to everyone in Bad Boy. He had basically said that he had sex with Faith Evans. He was talking about Lil' Kim. He was talking about Lil' C's. He was talking about other people from New York who weren't even a part of Bad Boy, like Prodigy, bringing up how he had a whole autoimmune disease. And everyone knows at the end where he just went completely off, especially on Bad Boy. He was like, F Bad Boy, F Diddy, F Biggie, F anyone associated with Bad Boy. And Keefe D talked about how Diddy was pissed when this song came out, and he had put an $1 million hit on Pac. He told Keefe D, if y'all get him, I will pay y'all $1 million, allegedly. And then I guess when Tupac had assaulted Orlando Anderson at the Mike Tyson event, Keefe D said that looked like the perfect opportunity to get Tupac. And then they talk about how Diddy apparently wanted multiple drivers to drive to California, and then Kirk Burrows even showed arrangements that he made to have multiple people go out in California, almost like lookouts and distractions, and to figure out Tupac's every move. And Kirk Burrows said at the time he found it all suspicious, but after Tupac's thing kind of started to come together as to why, and they actually showed the receipts also, but he just was talking about it all started to make sense as to why he needed all these cars the more and more that he found out about the circumstances surrounding Tupac's murder. And then Keefe D basically talks about it became easy to allegedly spot Tupac because while Suge Knight and Tupac were driving, there were like girls on the street that I'm not sure if they knew or not, but basically there were girls on the street screaming at him saying, Tupac, oh my god, like da 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 da. And then Suge Knight and Tupac were talking, telling them, oh, we're about to go to this club, da 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 da. And then Suge Knight was also playing very loud music while he was driving through Las Vegas, to the point where he actually got pulled over, but then they were later released. And Keefe D said that is allegedly how they spotted them. And then they even talked about that after they allegedly Tupac, they just watched him get carried by the ambulance. They waited for the paramedics to come, and I was like, that's demented. But and now when they talk about the payments that was supposed to be given, this is how they said it happened. So apparently Diddy gave the money to Eric Von Zip, who was supposed to give it to Keefe D, but Eric Von Zip allegedly backdoored Keefe D and just kept the money for himself. And so that is allegedly what happened to the money, and that's why Keefe D was just never allegedly paid. And then also Keefe D alleged that Diddy actually called him saying like, was that us that Tupac? And Keefe D allegedly confirmed that it was. And in this documentary, the detective basically talks about that it's hard to implicate Diddy into this because the only person that's alive who was allegedly a part of this whole scheme to kill Tupac is only Keefe D. Eric Von Zip ended up dying of cancer, and then Orlando Anderson actually was about 2 years after Tupac was killed. So it's really only Keefe D and Diddy that know the situation, and there aren't, again, the two people that could corroborate Keefe D are both dead. So it would just be hard to implicate Diddy through all this unless they found just really, concrete evidence. And now this is when they get into Biggie's. Now, when Biggie he was in Los Angeles for the Soul Train Awards, and Kirk Burrows talked about how everyone at Bad Boy was told not to come to LA. Do not come to LA. It is dangerous. People are after you. People are especially after Biggie, because at that time people thought that it was people from New York who were responsible, especially Diddy and the whole Bad Boy camp, who were responsible for Tupac's murder. And apparently Biggie did not want to go to the Soul Train Awards. He didn't want to perform, but Diddy kept pushing him to go perform. And after his performance, so the morning that Biggie was killed, he was supposed to go to London. And again, this is a story that has been told by many people. Biggie was supposed to go to London that morning. Him and Kirk Burrows were supposed to come together. But then Kirk Burrows alleged that when he called Biggie, Biggie was like, I'm not even going to London anymore. Diddy told me that I need to stay here. And apparently he was going to London because it was going to be a big deal. It would be the first time a Bad Boy artist would go to Europe and promote something. And his album Life After Death was about to come out. And also something very kind of eerie about that album is like he has a track called I'm Going to Cali, which is why. And apparently that day, and the reason that Diddy wanted Biggie to stay in LA is because he was throwing a party and he really wanted Biggie to be there. But Biggie really wanted to go to London. He did not want to be in LA anymore. And it's kind of eerie because they show a clip of Biggie just talking about how he feels very paranoid a lot. He really doesn't want to die young. He always feels like he has to watch his back. So it's just very, very eerie. So then that is when they get into the actual a Biggie. And basically what happened was when they were all, you know, driving back from whatever party that Diddy was throwing, that's when someone put up in a car and ended up at Biggie, and they, you know, showed never before seen footage of that whole situation of like, you know, everyone going around Biggie's car, and it's like recordings where you can hear Diddy, you know, being like, oh, is Biggie alive? Like, what's going on? Trying to get into a hospital. And it's just a very eerie situation. And what's so up about Diddy, like what's just so up about Diddy is that in his Can't Stop Won't Stop documentary, he says that Biggie is the one who wanted to push this whole peace treaty between the East versus West Coast, and he's the one that wanted to go to California and show solidarity. And then the detectives were talking about how Diddy was just a hindrance to Biggie's investigation. Like, he really was not trying to give them a lot of information. And this is also something that me and my dad had talked about, like, you know, years ago, of how Diddy was never like Tupac's real life best friend, like people, well, like Diddy, I should say, tried to make it seem like in the media. If anything, I feel like Biggie's real best friends are like people in Junior Mafia, like Lil C's and stuff. Like Biggie and Diddy were never just these two best friends that Diddy really tried to push out to the media. And it got really worse, especially after Biggie died. And that's when Diddy really, you know, amped up the, you know, appearance that him and Biggie were like brothers when they weren't. So then when it comes to Biggie's funeral, the documentary alleges that Diddy charged the funeral to Biggie's estate. He basically made the funeral recoupable. If that is true, that is the most diabolical, evil thing that a human being can do to someone who is seen as their best friend or their brother. And then in the documentary, they talk about how at that time around Biggie's death, that Biggie was actually trying to negotiate his contract, but it wasn't looking that well if he would even re-sign with Bad Boy. And according to Kirk Burrows, the reason that he got fired from Bad Boy is because Diddy wanted him to do a very shady business practice toward Biggie and his mother, but Kirk Burrows said that he just can't do that. So that is when Diddy fired him. And then at the end of it all, the documentary, Diddy just became even more popular after Biggie's death, especially after the song I'll Be Missing You, that just skyrocketed him even more into mainstream. And that is when we get to really begin to get to know the P. Diddy that we know today, the very successful mainstream P. Diddy. So now we get into episode 3, and literally in my notes I said I already feel pissed off because they begin to go back to footage vlogging himself basically before his arrest, or days before his arrest. And in this particular clip, it shows him talking to his current girlfriend. They don't say who it is, and then he's over here talking about like talk to daddy, and ew, like I literally put in my notes, do not piss me the off right now. And so in a portion of this episode, they get into how Diddy could be very controlling with the women that he was dealing with. They talked about Misa, they talked about Kim, and then they started to first get into Cassie. And then after this, they talk about the 1999 club that Diddy and his artist Shine was a part of, and also J-Lo was at this club when this night shooting happened. A woman named Natanya Rubens was in the face, and to this day she is very adamant that Diddy was the one who fired the shot where she was hit in the face. And also after the shooting happened, Diddy tried to offer his driver money and a diamond ring to take the fall for him, which the driver did not do. And then they also talked about an incident that happened where Diddy and his bodyguards were accused of attacking Nas's former manager, Steve Stout, in 1999 because in a song that him and Nas did called Hate Me Now, there's a scene where Diddy is like on the cross getting crucified like Jesus was. And a pastor had reached out to Diddy saying this is very blasphemous. And then Diddy tried to reach out to Steve to see if he can get the scene taken down from the video, but the scene was not cut out of the video. So then he got mad and allegedly attacked him. And then they settled for $500,000, and Diddy only got 1 day of anger management, and they showed pictures of them still together. And I'm just like, you sued this man for attacking you, and you still went around him. That would never see me again in his life, and it would literally be beef for the rest of our life. Nah. So then going back to the club shooting, they played clips of Shine accusing Diddy of hiring lawyers that really weren't trying to help Shine. I was trying to sabotage him to make Diddy look better, because at the end of it all, Shine ended up getting 10 years in jail while Diddy was acquitted of all charges related to the shooting. And then in this episode, they begin to talk about the decline of Bad Boy. And literally the reason there was a decline is because Diddy was just not paying people. He wasn't investing enough to give these artists longevity in their careers. Because again, going back to how I was talking about how before all these heinous things came out about Diddy again, I was already seeing YouTube videos about how Diddy was just a heinous person as a businessman to his artists in Bad Boy. And there's this thing called the Bad Boy curse, where an artist would get one album, that one album would become very successful, and after that it's like they fall off the face of the earth. The only people that really were an exception to this were, I want to say Biggie, but unfortunately I want to say Biggie. I do believe that Life After Death, regardless of Biggie's death, would have been a very big album. Mace is an interesting case because Mace decided to leave the industry himself, but he himself had a very, very big push, especially after Biggie's death. Faith Evans is an exception, and the Lox are an exception because they actually ended up leaving Bad Boy and actually found even more success after they left, so they are also an exception. But that's only 3 artists. But again, there are many artists that unfortunately have succumbed to the Bad Boy curse. You're a one album wonder basically. And then the culture of the company started to become very icky because it looks like when you're at the company, you're either about to go to jail for a lot of years or you're just about to. And also 112 is also an exception to this rule. 112 was not a one album wonder at all. And then we start talking about making the band. And in this documentary, they talked about making the band in terms of really helping to give a rebirth to Diddy's fame. Because yes, he also started Sean John at this time, which was a successful clothing company. But as far as being more mainstream in music terms, in the music business, making the band really made him really just introduced him music wise to a whole nother generation of people. And according to people that they interviewed that were a part of making the band, the contracts offered them fame and not fame and fortune, which again, Diddy had such business practices, and he really had contracts where it's like, I am making more money than you, the actual artist who is actually the one recording these songs, performing these songs, going on all these press tours. I am the one that's going to be paid. And something in this documentary that I do wish that they would have touched on just a little bit more is I would have loved to hear more of, you know, their experiences on making the band and, you know, signing with Diddy at this time around making the band, because they had members from Day 26 in there. They had Aubrey O'Day in there. They had a member, her name was like Brooklyn Babs, I'm going to put the correct name somewhere, who was in the group The Band. But I would have loved to hear more about their experiences with working with Diddy at this time after being signed with him, like just a little bit, you know, more digging into that. And also with making the band being on MTV, that gave him even more pop credibility because they're being played to audiences that were not just black but also white. And unfortunately, there's a thing where when artists are introduced to, especially black artists, when they are introduced to a white audience, they are, you know, quote unquote awarded more mainstream success. So being on MTV just gave Diddy even more mainstream success because as far as the pop world, he was getting more recognition. And then making the band just felt like this man made them walk from Manhattan to Brooklyn to get cheesecake to prove that they really wanted to be here, which is absolutely insane. And then we get into Aubrey O'Day, and Aubrey O'Day has been someone that has always been very, very outspoken and very critical of Diddy, again, even before all the heinous things about him came out. And in this documentary, she alleged that Diddy was sending emails to her about wanting to have with her and wanting to turn her out, and then sending him pictures of his and then just always, alluding to wanting to be a controlling man toward her. And Aubrey actually showed these emails in the documentary. She still saved them. And then she feels like she was fired because she just never accepted his advances. And also in this documentary, they talked to Kalina Harper, and Kalina was a part of the group Dirty Money with Dawn Robinson, and Dawn was also a part of Danity Kane, who was formed and making the band with Aubrey O'Day, who was also a member. And Kalina was interesting in this documentary because as we go through, the last 2 episodes, the way that she speaks about Diddy is a sense of gratitude mixed with almost a little bit of resentment, especially when we get toward the charges actually about to be brought toward him. It was an very interesting emotions, I just should say, that she was, putting out there when it came to Diddy. So one thing also that I should talk about is how Dawn actually ended up suing Diddy for misconduct, unpaid wages, and many more. And Kalina was trying to say that Dawn and Diddy kind of had like this unspoken relationship. And then after we talk to Kalina, they get into just the beginnings of Cassie and Diddy's horrific relationship. So Cassie was 19 at the time that she met Diddy and signed to him, and she was actually dating producer Ryan Leslie at this time. Ryan Leslie is very essential to her first album, especially the classic song Me and You. And Diddy heard the song Me and You in a club and just told himself like he needs to get this artist, he needs to get this song, he needs to put it out there. It's a very good song. And many people in the documentary said that at this point he wanted Ryan to get out of the picture, and then they began to see Diddy and Cassie more together and less of Ryan and Cassie or Ryan and Diddy together. And then at this time, that is when Diddy ends up signing Cassie to a 10-year album deal. Do you know how insane a 10-year album deal is? Mind you, Cassie only released 1 album while signed to Bad Boy, and she released about 2 EPs. She didn't even release a second album with Bad Boy, but she was signed to a 10-year album deal. That's actually clinically insane. So in this interview, they end up interviewing a former gigolo named Clayton Howard. Now, Clayton Howard is currently suing Cassie and Diddy, but in this documentary, he talks about the experiences that he had with Diddy and Cassie and the things that he allegedly took part of and witnessed. So he said that he first met Diddy and Cassie in 2009, and Cassie was someone who actually reached out to him. And then at this time, Diddy went by Frank Black. And it's very interesting because in the documentary, they show like a old video that Diddy had posted on his Instagram story with Cassie in it. And on his laptop, like in the corner, you can see where the laptop says Frank's MacBook Pro. And even when they arrested Diddy and they had went through his hotel room, they found drugs with the name Frank Black. So Frank Black is a name that is an alias, I should say, that Diddy has been using for a very long time. And Clayton talks about how they basically did stuff with him while at first Diddy wouldn't participate, but he would direct them. And then he said that he was dealing with him and Cassie for 8 years, so from about 2009 to 2017. And then he talked about how after each, night they would have together, that they would collect his allegedly, and he just didn't know what they were doing with it. But when he did point it out and say it's weird, they just stopped doing it. So, and then they talk about Diddy and his relationship with, and a lot of people said that in the beginning of Diddy's early career, like when he was at Uptown as an intern, he never drank or did. But then there was an incident where him and Kim ended up getting into an argument, and he did end up like his wrist. After this incident, he was put on perks, and then there were people saying that allegedly after this he got addicted to perks, and then that's when he just got addicted to perks in general. And then Clayton said that they were just doing pretty much allegedly every, especially a lot of. And Clayton alleged that anytime Cassie didn't want to do drugs, or even before they would have one of these nights together, that Cassie, when he would actually try to run, and then after she would run, Diddy would catch her. And Clayton said that he witnessed Diddy her a lot. And toward the end of this documentary, what stuck out to me is that after Cassie sued him and the many other lawsuits came out, and after, after the video came out, he went to Harlem and you still saw people praising him, people wanting to just be around him, being enamored by him. You saw Funky Jim Jones, the rapper from the Diplomats, still hanging out with him. Mind you, this is after the video of Cassie has already come out. And then he's shaking hands with people. He's, hugging them. And when he gets in the car, he says something so interesting and diabolical. He's like, this is something that I need to do. I need to show people that people still support me. People need to see that people don't see me as his villain. And then he literally says that he now needs to put hand sanitizer on and shower a lot because he just hugged these people and shook their hands. And I was just like, so in the same breath, you're admitting that you're really just trying to be in Harlem, where he's from, is very intentional. But you're really just trying to be out there with people so you can just show good face and that people still like you. And then you're trying to call them dirty by saying, damn, now I need to shower and put hand sanitizer on. Okay. All right, Diddy. And then at the end of this episode, also, the bodyguard Roger said something interesting about when that Cassie lawsuit came out. And I stand by this. It really did open the floodgates for people to now feel comfortable to now tell their story about Diddy and to expose just how much of a terror Diddy really is. So in episode 4, we learned more about Capricorn Clark, who first started off as Diddy's assistant, and then she basically became the head of marketing for Sean John. What I gathered from Capricorn and just the vibe she was getting off in this documentary, she almost felt gratitude in the beginning for Diddy because she went from being an assistant to being the head of marketing to a very successful clothing company. He really did give her opportunities. So at this point, everyone knows that it's alleged that Diddy tried to Kid Cudi. He actually ended up his car because Kid Cudi and Cassie were seeing each other. And Capricorn tells a story of how Cassie wanted to go hiking with Diddy, but Capricorn was mad at Cassie because she felt like she had put Capricorn in a very compromising position because now she knows that Cassie and Kid Cudi hangs out and then Diddy is her boss. Now she feels like she needs to tell Diddy, and she just felt like in a very uncomfortable place. But Kid Cudi ended up going hiking with them. And then Diddy found out about this, and Capricorn says that Diddy then basically kidnapped her, took her to Kid Cudi's house to try to kill him. And then she also talked about how, like, when she was first hired, she was threatened by Diddy because her best friend is actually the mother of a child that she has with Suge Knight. So when she was first hired, she alleged that Diddy took her to Central Park, confronted her about being in somewhat having close proximation to Suge Knight, and basically saying, like, something happens, I'm gonna have you in the park and And then we get into Rodney Lewis, aka Little Rod, who is a producer who actually worked with Diddy for his Love album, his last album that was released the year that the Cassie lawsuit came out. And Rodney himself is actually currently suing Diddy as well for a multitude of things, including unpaid wages and for. And one thing I put in my notes is I am glad that in this documentary they were kind of attacking this black excellence image that Diddy loved to put off all the time. I do like that they challenged that a lot and really put more emphasis that Diddy never was the poster child for black excellence, no matter how much the media tried to, and Diddy himself tried to push that self onto him. But one thing that Rodney talked about was when he was making the Love album, what really made him stand out to Diddy is that they were making a song called Moments, and Diddy really wanted this song to sound like I Can't Help It by Michael Jackson, and Rodney was the one who made it sound very similar to that. So Diddy took, a close liking to him and invited him on yachts and on all these trips to work on the album. And also in this documentary, we are showed videos that Rodney had recorded while they were working on this album and voice messages that Diddy was leaving him. So the first alarming thing that Lil Rod shared was that he witnessed Diddy and his son Justin someone in a bathroom while they were recording. And they even show in the documentary a recording of after, the that was in the bathroom. And then they even show like a headline where there is, a report of of someone, but they don't, say who it is, or it's very all, little detail to it. And also it was revealed that in these sessions that for the Love album, that Diddy was actually making songs about Cassie trying to say sorry and to come back. And mind you, at this time, Cassie already was married with kids. And then Rodney was talking about how Diddy was allegedly showing him videos of people having saying that this is how people become successful. Rodney said that he was a lot, that Rodney pretty much said that, he would often wake up at times not remembering anything, just being in a bed with a lot of girls, or even being in a bed with Diddy. He was alleging that Justin, Diddy's son, was a part of these nights that would happen. He was also saying that in these properties and these yachts and these hotel rooms that Diddy had hidden cameras everywhere. And something interesting is that, again, the former bodyguard Diddy talked about his kids, and I've always said that in this situation I really only feel bad for his daughters, but he said something interesting in that Diddy really didn't raise his sons to look after his companies, really just business wise. He really didn't set them up to be successful as a businessman. He almost raised them to always be at his side, not really wanting them to be better than him, not really wanting them to be successful businessmen to take after his company. It was just a very weird dynamic, almost like they always had to be on their dad's side, and they always had to just abide by what their dad wanted. And then in the 13 months that he worked on the Love album, he was never paid. And when he did actually get paid, he only got $29,000. And then someone made a good point that it feels like Diddy just always wants people needing him, because that way he can have control over them. And then also Rodney played voice messages of Diddy continuously reaching out to him, because Rodney kept asking where his money is, and that Diddy was almost gaslighting him, saying, you know how much I value you, know how much you mean to me, like I'm gonna make sure you good. He just never made sure that he was good. And then again, Rodney talked about how when he saw that Cassie sued Diddy, he then felt comfortable to then sue Diddy. And another thing that I hate that people bring up is like, oh my God, after Cassie, everyone was just trying to get a payday, and why did all these lawsuits come out and everyone's just lying? And I'm like, if Diddy was a terror to society for almost 30 years, you don't think there's hundreds of people that he has victimized? Like, can we not act dense here? You really think over 30 years it will only be a few people that have stories about him? And then Aubrey O'Day, and this is very sad. Aubrey O'Day talked about an affidavit where a plaintiff is claiming that in 2005 that she had allegedly walked in on Aubrey being by Diddy and another man, and Aubrey said that she has no recollection of this. And it's just very sad, because even Aubrey is saying like she doesn't even want to know if she was or want to remember. That was just very, very sad. Like very, very sad to hear. And then we go back to current day, basically when Diddy had the videographer following him around. And then we get back to Kalina. And when the Don lawsuit drops, it actually shows like Diddy's reaction in real time. And then, he's telling people, find these clips of Don talking good about him, saying all these positive things about him, saying like, what the F, like this girl was just on my album. And then basically Kalina comes into the picture, because again, Kalina and Don were in the group Dirty Money together. And Diddy is literally begging Kalina basically to please put out a statement speaking positive of him. And then Justin is making comments about how they just want to tear the black man down, and it's just like, shut up, like shut up. And then he's over here on the phone with Kalina saying like, I just need this really big favor, like I really need you to put out a statement. And Kalina says that she actually called Diddy recently, because she is in a very big child custody battle, and all she needed was $5,000 to help her out. And Diddy said he can't give it to her, telling her to basically hurry up and put out a statement to be on your side. And Kalina did it. And in the documentary, Kalina addressed, like she's not trying to wear bulletproof vests, for basically she doesn't want people to think that she's like a protector of Puff. She's not a protector of Diddy. It's just very interesting, because even she says like she still loves him in the same breath where he wouldn't even give her $5,000, where to him that's nothing. It's just, I don't know, maybe she does feel in debt to him for giving her a career. Maybe she still has this false hope that he can help her with the child custody case. It's just, I don't know how to read her. I really, really don't. It's just very interesting. Like her role in this documentary was just very interesting. Very. And then we go back to Capricorn Clark. And something interesting that she said is that she basically knew that Diddy was such a person, but she had love for the culture to not take him down. In that having to testify in the case, the federal case against Diddy, re-traumatized her, and she hated that she basically had to be faced with the things that she always turned the other way about or would push in the back of her mind, say it didn't happen. And now she has to really admit just the things that Diddy did. And I feel like that's really just how a lot of people were probably looking at things that never really spoke out against Diddy. Now, this when I get into the jurors. Juror 160 and 75 are on my list. Now, jury 160 said she was a fan of his music, but wasn't a fan of him. Didn't really know about him. But she watched Making the Band. Make that make sense when she's talking about, and they'll make eye contact sometimes and do the same gestures when something probably didn't make sense. Huh? The jury wasn't sequestered, and sequester basically means that the jury has access to nobody, to nothing, not the outside world, not to relatives. They can't talk to no one, be on no computer. She admitted that basically jurors were still online. I said, my God, like, ugh. And also in this documentary, it was revealed that Diddy's legal team would bring in like people on Instagram who called themselves quote unquote media, basically people who were just like bloggers and gossip pages. They will all kind of huddle and convene together during the trial, like either in a room or just somewhere in a big space. And then people noticed that after these bloggers and gossip, pages would talk to Diddy's PR team, they would then be on their pages making an opinion that is very much swayed towards Diddy's side and paints all the people that were accusing Diddy of these crimes as manipulators and people that we need to be questioning more than we should question Diddy. And that's why I am a person who is continuously saying that we really need to be careful with the information that we are consuming and who we are consuming it from. Like, please, people, we cannot just be over here believing everything that we see in big black bold font. And then even when juror 160 was talking about the hotel video, she said she's forgivable. What? And then juror 75, who is a man, was over here talking about Cassie and Diddy's relationship seemed like two people who were overly in love. Huh? And then juror 75 was like, well, Cassie still went back. And I said, my gosh, what? And then juror 160 was saying she really couldn't believe Capricorn's testimony because it was too emotional when she was talking about being with the in the car. I said, my God, I can absolutely understand how he got away with some of those charges. Absolutely. And at the end of episode 4, what was interesting is that Kirk Burrow said, and I think he was even admitting his own fault in all this, is that when it comes to the jury, people who have worked with Diddy, that when it comes to fans of Diddy, people who have worked with him, and then when you see how the jury let him off certain very serious charges, is that people became probably so normalized with Diddy and his abuse, his very almost erratic personality, that became so normalized, and people unfortunately look at it as normalized behavior, that of course they were never going to hold him accountable for anything that he did. And also, he's Diddy, the poster child for black excellence. How could he ever do these heinous things? There has to be an explanation. Now, when it comes to my overall thoughts on this documentary, 50's involvement, people's reaction to it. When it comes to 50 Cent in this documentary, I will say this. I don't think that 50 Cent is doing this because he genuinely cares about the victims, because he genuinely wants to see Diddy pay for being a terror to people's lives for almost 30 years. I definitely think that this is for revenge. I don't think that this is being done for good. I don't think him helping executive produce this is for good. However, I don't like how people are trying to use that as an excuse to discredit all the things that Diddy has done to terrorize people for almost 30 years. And not only financially, but to also, again, terrorize people physically, emotionally, and mentally. That's like, for example, if someone hates me, and let's say I go around people with the car around town and I've been getting away with it. I don't know. Like, say someone that hates me knows this information, and then say I've been caught, I've been tried, I've been found guilty, and this person decides to make a documentary because they hate me so much that they just want to highlight how of a person I've been, how I've been literally terrorizing people physically. That still doesn't negate the fact that I was going around people with cars and getting away with it. And I'm so also glad that this documentary shed light on this whole stupid image of black excellence. Diddy does not represent black excellence because, again, Diddy was already seen as a person who has screwed over his own black artists, who has screwed over his own black colleagues that he has worked with. So where does that equal black excellence if he's literally screwing over black people, idiots? Explain it to me like I'm 5, how Diddy represents black excellence, how trying to expose Diddy for his wrongdoing is tearing the black man down, when that same black man has torn down other black people and has not helped them. Wasn't even trying to pay the person who helped him co-found Bad Boy. Not even barely. Wasn't paying his artist. What is so black excellence about that? Because he benefited himself? Like, please, people, please. And one thing I'm also glad that this documentary has shed light on is how, especially in the black community, is really, you're just not supposed to speak of it. And I have made this point before of how when someone, especially a man, is popular and with power, you're not supposed to speak of, you're not supposed to speak anything ill of this person, or either you're looked at as a liar. How dare you? Why are you trying to ruin this man's life? But it's just so disheartening and disgusting and almost interesting. And another thing is, why can't two things just be true at once? Why can't it be true that yes, people allowed Diddy to do these things because he was giving them money, because he had power, and most likely because he was also still threatening them? But why can't that also coincide with Diddy just being a terror to people? Why does it have to be either or? Why are people using the fact that people may have stayed for money to almost excuse the fact that Diddy was a people? One does not cancel the other one out. And I really hope that with Diddy, we can finally start having very, very taboo conversations and honest and raw conversations about how entertainment industry can be, how people in the entertainment industry prey on people's dreams, their financial problems, so they can abuse them. And I hope that in the black community with this documentary, we begin to really hold these men accountable and stop making excuses for them. From 2026 and beyond, can we stop? Let this black man go when they weren't even excellent in the first place. Because I'm tired. I am tired. And this documentary really just made me realize how tired I am of this same trope that we keep going through. Let's just stop it, please. All right, guys. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I would love to hear you guys' opinions in the comments. Remember to please keep it respectful, and remember to always keep life cute, fab, and fun. And I will see you guys in the next video.